So hi everyone, my name's Donna Marie Baptiste, and I'm really excited to be here. I want to thank Prizm and Elena for having me. And we have our wonderful artists here, Tariku, Shiferaw, Tahir, Karmali. And we're going to talk today a little bit about their practices and their work. I don't know if you guys have had a chance to look at Elena's, to see the booth, but the work is stunning. I mean, it's really beautiful. I call it the gold booth because the theme seems to be very gold and kind of muted, earthy tone. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful booth, really well hung. So Tahir Karmali, born 1987. Now we know your age. Born and raised in Nairobi, Kenya. He's Brooklyn-based. Visual artist who began his practice as a painter and a sculptor. Karmali's interest is in photography. Well, Karmali's interest in photography started while traveling through East Africa and Southeast Asia. Later received his master's in photography at SVA. His interest in material and process is integral to how he communicates narratives centered around global, environmental, and socioeconomic factors. Karmali has exhibited in the Guggenheim Museum, Bilbao, Kunsthal, Rotterdam, High Museum of Art, Atlanta, Rachel Uffner Gallery, New York, Pioneer Works in Brooklyn, Brooklyn College Library, Brooklyn, United Photo Industries, Brooklyn, and Circle Art in Nairobi. Tariku Shiferaw was raised in Los Angeles, California, and currently lives and works in New York City. He was included in the 2017 Whitney Biennial as part of Occupy Museum's Debt Fair project, a group exhibition titled A Poetical Wager at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Cleveland, and a solo show, Erase Me, at Addis Fine Art in their London project space. He's a current participant in open sessions at the Drawing Center in New York, as well as the Independent Study Program at the Whitney Museum of Art in New York. His work has been featured in Hyperallergic, The Washington Post, and Art in America magazine, among a variety of publications. Shiferaw, in 2015, received his MFA from Parsons School of Design and his BFA from the University of Southern California in 2007. So this is Tariku, and I'll just give you a little background. Seems like most of you probably know, you know these guys, but so both of the artists are focused on the commodification of culture and people of the African diaspora. Both of their work is conceptually based, and their use of materials is heavily considered in their process. So I think we should start a little bit with, we'll start with, since we have Tariku up here, I really want to hear about the work that you're showing here, and just give our audience a little bit of background about the work and why you're doing those works now.
So let's make sure what's up. Can y'all hear me? Word. So my current body of work is titled One of These Black Boys, and the work that I have in the show is an iteration of that work. I have some of the newer paintings, and the very first painting I did in that body of work, which is on canvas, and then you see this piece, and there's another piece, which is made of vinyl, spray painted in the back, stretched on the stretchers, and through this, the stripes here, they're actually they were taped before I spray painted it. So when you remove that, you see the layers in the background, which is in an iridescent film and mylar. And so working through different materials. There's also a wooden sculpture on the floor, which sort of deals with the same topic, same conversation. My work in general deals with mark making, the marking of the painting surface, but also marking oneself into a society, or in all the ways how mark making sort of works.
So this is the sculpture that's in the space, and I remember Elena was telling me that you normally put paintings in the sculpture. So I was, or a painting in there, and I was wondering why you didn't do that for this one and what that signifies.
Yeah, so this work is sort of like, it's made in 14 pieces, so it's like, it resembles the idea of like a shipping pallet. And so oftentimes I imagine it with like paintings in there because to talk about like the idea of the the art market as well as, black bodies and black culture. But in this case, I saw the work, and the previous two pieces that I've done, I had placed, paintings in there. But in this case, I just didn't think it was necessary because of like everything that is happening inside. When you look above it, there's this like almost like musical bars just like going down like almost unexpectedly. So I had to sort of respond to the materiality of the work.
Okay, so from here, I'd like to forward to Tahir's work because I want to address that comment that you just made about black bodies, and I wanted to talk a little about this cobalt. This first of all, if you could tell us a little bit about this, which I think is so beautiful. But then when I started learning the backstory of this work and why you made this body of work, I was just enthralled. So if you could just speak a little bit about this work and what it represents.
So this series is Strata. It's part of a body of work that explores cobalt mining and blood minerals used in cell phone batteries. And I started getting really interested in how to combine and discuss such a topic that's like very journalistic. My practice as well comes from photography as well as sculpture and painting. But photography really help me sort of build narratives, and it's the whole idea of like looking for a story and finding out how to talk about it. But merging with my practice as a sculptor and as a painter, I sort of happen to, use these materials like the raffia and the cobalt and like dyeing that. So the actual process is opening up the cell phone battery, like exposing myself to like this dangerous process, creating my own pigments, and then dyeing this very traditional like raffia material with it, which doesn't really accept dye very easily. So it's like really a process of pushing into the material to like create that green. The copper as well is from the battery, and these are all materials that sort of, these are all materials that really sort of push us forward in the sort of like developed nation, but like destroys like the Congo and like Central Africa. And watching, so I had watched a lot of videos and like I've seen a lot of photographs taken of these sort of illegal mines in these sort of areas, and like just like the entire practice of like acquiring that material, and children like being sent down these like really narrow shafts and like them being exposed to heavy metal poisoning. It's really terrible, and like heavy metal poisoning, I can tell you from my experience making this work, is not very pleasant. But like I have access to like goji berries and like all sorts of like antioxidants to like help me like get through the making of the work. But I can't imagine what it's like for like a child to go through actually like mining these things for like an industry that is supposed to be like setting us free. Like the technology is supposed to be solving issues and not like breaking the world apart. But that's just the nature of like neocolonialism. So.
Well, I just wanted to add this this little blurb that I kind of copy and pasted for you all regarding this body of work, just as a reference to what Tahir is speaking to. UNICEF has recently reported that over 40,000 children are mining this toxic material, which is a layered effect considering that the DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo, has over 4 million orphans and one of the highest maternal death rates in the world due to many factors such as war, poverty, and available health care. So that's, as you can see, that's why when I was learning about this work, I was just mesmerized. Not only is it's stunningly beautiful, but you think of just the toxicity that it takes to make something this beautiful. So I was wondering, for both of you, this question is for either of you, when you're thinking about making work, you have to source materials. I mean, I learned this just from being a curator and working with artists, or helping them source materials. But how do you come to that decision? Like when you're making, what comes first? Do you see materials and you say, oh, I'm going to do this with the materials, or do you say, oh, I have this work in my head that I want to do and I need X materials? Because materials are very important to both of your practices. Like they seem to be kind of the center of both of what you do. You're either working, even with your photography, it's very much about the kinds of subjects that you choose, and so I'm wondering, how do you make those decisions? As artists, what drives that decision-making process?
How do I come to it? So I think a lot about what we consume, and I think a lot about how we decide to choose the things that we buy to put on our body, to put into our body, and adorn ourselves with, and how that material is like very much considered, especially with food, and like where and how you nourishing your body. And we get very concerned about, like, is it organic, is it from a farm, is it from this? And I think that that kind of thinking has always been present, and like being like growing up in Nairobi and like being in Kenya, being so close to the land and knowing where all of this is coming from. But just in the practice of as I grew up in Kenya and like wanting to be an artist and being an apprentice to a sculptor and painter, and like how the materials are sourced and made, and like what could be made from like recyclia, what could be made from things that you buy in the store, and what's available, and that has always been in the back burner of my mind, something that's always been sort of like stretched. And so when I come to create concepts, and when I come to like look at stories and find stories, I'm really interested in like, what are the materials that are we interfacing with? Like, what is the story that you're interfacing with? Like, especially when you like now, it's a very prevalent issue with migration and immigration, and myself as a migrant into this country, how much like paper and that fiber and that sort of like idea that the paper itself is the validator for me to cross into a landscape, and what is that presence of it, and like how does that material like last, and how could that create a story for a viewer?
Well, for me, it's more like I've been a painter through and through in the past, and so I started with canvases, often stretching them myself, and as I played around with the idea of like working with traditional materials, like stretching canvases and priming them with gesso, and started introducing other materials to other mediums to sort of change the surface, the thickness and all that. Then I came across the idea of stretching other materials onto the frame. So pretty much I started working with Home Depot plastic materials. I started hanging them without stretching them, and then also stretching them whether they're clear or black plastic. I thought that was interesting, and then introducing spray paint to my practice was also an addition to it, and to see how well it sticks to what material. And then slowly, like before getting to the vinyl material, which is up right now, I discovered that the Home Depot plastic material sort of like changed. It's what is it? It became tighter when it's in the cold, and then and it's sort of like loosened up when it's in like the heat. And so I thought that was kind of interesting, and that's how like one of these Black Boy series was birthed, And so now I work with wood as well, and only because of like the inspiration behind the shipping pallets.
So talking about migration, because that's one of when you mentioned migration, and I think we all have that in common. We're all first generation, or all immigrants into this, all born in another country, and immigrated to this country. I've always been fascinated with migration, particularly the migration of black and brown people, because we always tend to migrate to places where we go from being the majority to a minority. So, and I wondered, how do the complexities of being, black and brown immigrants affect your work? I know that for me, I'm not an artist, but I know that everything that I do and every decision that I make, whether it be a curatorial decision or a programming decision or an administrative decision working in the arts, I'm always conscious of others. Yeah, I'm very mindful of that because of being, a black immigrant to this country. So I'm always mindful of other people's experience, regardless of culture or ethnicity. And I just wondered, as artists, how do you process that in your work?
Good. So for me, I've the work that I do is initially abstract paintings, and historically it's been known, well, not historically, but art history has written it in a way that it belongs to the white male, and well, that is absolutely not true. And so working through those ideas, preconceived ideas, was the toughest part in the beginning. Oh, cool, you're making abstract works, but then again, we know that some historic black artists that were not represented by it were not presented, and therefore I did not know about them growing up. And so I'm looking at those things, and I'm looking at myself. I'm like, how does my work fit into this into this culture, into this space? And so when I make work, yeah, it does affect where I'm from, where I'm at, who I am, what I look like, and into this whole scope. And so, for instance, when I'm making my work right now, then it's directly in conversation with that in mind. Just to hit up on some, if we're making contemporary art, then contemporary art is dealing with what's here, what's right now, and what are the most important questions that I want to present. And those are the most important questions that I want to present. How do I take space in this place, and especially using abstract paintings, one that has existed for a very long time, but in a very different context in the past. And so I do think a lot about those, and those are the thoughts that come to mind.
I guess I really don't try to think about my race in any way when I'm making work. I definitely know that it is present when when I'm showing work and I'm with the work, and my work doesn't discuss my race in any way, and I don't need it to, and I don't particularly want it to. I want that my work to be recognized from where I'm from, and I am inspired by my Kenyan contemporaries a lot, and I try to make sure that I am constantly in conversation across seas with my fellow artists in Kenya. But moving through spaces as a brown person is always interesting when you're an artist, because you're always asked, how much of your origin is valuable for the work? Does it give it value? Does it change the meaning of the work? I get asked where I'm from all the time in general. I'm really sort of disinterested in the presence of my race in my work. I don't need it to be there. That's not what I'm talking about in there. But definitely moving through borders as a brown person is incredibly difficult. and especially somebody holding a Kenyan passport is incredibly difficult. So there is a sense of frustration and immobility with me being able to put my work in certain places and having access to certain places without constantly asking permission of like some, white like bureaucrat. That is definitely very interesting, very irritating, not interesting in any ways. And I did make work about that, and it is very present. But there are a lot of people that go through this issue, and it is a global problem. Yeah.
Yeah, those were both really, really very interesting answers, because I'm always very interested in the process, in artist's process. I think it's, I think it's fascinating to hear, what's going on in there, and how does it go from here to there? How does it become that? So when you have a lot of other things going on, a lot of other noise in your head, how does that come out here? So that was really the basis of the question. And obviously none of us want to be based on what we look like, or the color, none of us. But I think as we move through life, it does affect you, it has to. And so I just wondered how artists are able to separate and make work so incredibly beautiful. So I wanted to ask you, shying away from the politics of today, but talking about the politics of art. And I wanted to ask you both, do you feel the act of making art is political? Or can it be? Should it be?
I think the act of existing is political. The act of being here, sitting, occupying the seat is political. Anything we do is political. Like, the world functions because we are a commodity of our culture. We are capital. People are capital. And so if I make art, whether I make it or not, whether I make a statement or not, it's political. And so whenever I make something, it better say something.
I completely agree. I feel that, yes, exactly what Tariku has said, but to build on the point, maybe stray away from it, sometimes I feel that it's nice to not have to be concerned with the politics of making art. And I do love to sort of make work for myself, which isn't political, but I mean that statement, okay, so if we're going off of that argument, if we're going off of that argument, I'm gonna try to figure out how to counter that somehow, but
Can I add to what you just
sure.
said? Yeah, making art could be fun too, yes, and it is fun. And I think you're right. Sometimes we need to erase everything and exist in the studio and make our work. But the moment we set foot out of the studio,
Right.
then everything is political. So you sort of edit what comes out of the studio. There's works that I make for my own eyes only.
But based on what you first said, then just
Yeah.
having fun is political. So anything that we're doing
it
can
is.
be drinking water could be political. The decisions that you're making can be political.
Yeah.
So
As long as you're aware by
deciding
by
to
it,
use
yeah.
an iPhone versus
Samsung.
versus a Samsung is political. All of it can be interpreted. But I think it's how do you sort of assign what is deliberate political intent, and that giving yourself political agency versus just sort of being accepting this notion that being complacent and just doing what you're doing is political, because then what is active and what is inactive, and what is an inactive political statement by just existing. I mean, you know, it's just like one of those things. It's like, you should do what you should, you know, believe in yourself and like, you know, whatever. If everyone believed in themselves and all that kind of stuff and did what they wanted and like did all that kind of stuff, we'll have a very, you know, it's one of those kind of statements where like complacency can like really take over and just sort of like, it gives too much justification for doing nothing.
Okay. I'm going to switch it up a little bit because I noticed that I've been, you know, I've looked at your Instagrams and I've been seeing how you guys get your work out into the world outside of a white cube, which I think is really interesting. So my next question was going to be, well, it was kind of a statement and then a question, which is that, you know, as we all know, the art world can be rather insular. I think that's a nice politically correct way of saying it, that, you know, it can be a bit inaccessible to some people. And I'm really interested in how artists are going outside of galleries and museums to bring their art to people so that people can see their work. Like what are the ways? Instagram is a great way, but I'm curious as to what other ways have you used to get your work out and to show your work to the world?
For me, I think like we've had like a DIY like spots like where artists come together and just show together. It's not necessarily a gallery or any institution, but also like showing at like you know, like at a friend's space where, you know, like it's just their living space, but like, you know, you're having a conversation. So like the conversation continues no matter where you show. You don't necessarily have to be showing at a gallery or a museum for as long as, you know, I mean, I have friends that are curating shows and they're microwave. So like, you know, we're speaking about like different spaces that we show. So like the art is the art, and there's a conversation that floats around it, whether it's on Instagram. I've had friends that have had shows online, you know, online gallery kind of a thing where, you know, it's curated. So you're always, you know, pushing the envelope to see like how else you could present the works. It doesn't have to be in the white cube. The work lives on, you know.
With your photography, I mean, I haven't you done? You've shown your photography a lot of places. I mean, you've got some really stunning work. I actually learned about your photography through OK Player or OK Africa, I think. Yeah. And actually OK Africa first, and then OK Player, and that's how I learned about your photography work. So, and they ran a beautiful story on that series of work that you did. The stunning African. I wish we had images of that. It's beautiful, but I was wondering if photography is a way for you to kind of push your work out into the world. That's, you know, it's not sculptural. So is it easier for you to get your photography out into the world? Has that been an easier way, or what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, yeah, the ubiquity of photography and its proliferation is definitely easier than sculpture. But like the consumption of the image these days is completely different from not just like from 10 years ago, or even from 5 years ago when the Joe series was made. Or no, that was like 6 years. Yeah. Do you remember? Somewhere there, yeah. It was like some time ago. And it's interesting to see like, you know, stuff being on Pinterest, stuff being on this and blah, 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 and I get all these notifications of people referring to my photography all the time. And yes, it's a great way of like having it out into like through the digital space, and also for it to be printed as in postcards and so on. But in terms of like stepping out, I want to talk about stepping out of the white cube. And more specifically talking about sort of, yes, like I make work in my studio that is specifically like, this is going to be hung like this is supposed to be bolted, this is supposed to be suspended, this is supposed to sit in this kind of space. So that kind of work going out into the community and like going, like people inviting to the studio, but these are like physical like objects. So I'm more interested now in like, how do I go into a community and work with the community to do something that is not necessarily like built to last, but like ephemeral moments, like moments that you are sort of like purposely bringing people together in
social
terms
practice
of more
kind
of a
of work.
social practice, right? And so I've done like a couple of like social practice, and I've worked with quite a lot of artists that have a social practice that that don't necessarily live in this sort of like conventional way of like it having to be photographed and it having to like this need that we have today for like having to preserve something, this like need to have like some sort of like ledger for everything that needs to be done. It's a habit that I feel, you know, it takes away from the like impetus and the soul of the work, you know.
So experiences, like
Nothing-
social practice experiences, are you're saying are can be as important, if not more important, than material work. Sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, I've worked very closely with like Pioneer Works and Brick and my gallery in Kenya and Kuona Trust and a bunch of like organizations where like we're not too concerned about like, yes, whether like the Knight Foundation like knows about it or whatever. No, we care about the actual community and like actually doing it like the way it should be done, to actually think about and impacting like, okay, what does the community of Red Hook care about in terms of like a social practice? What will bring people like together? You know, what are they interested in, you know? But also do it in a way that is not sort of like, I am the artist and I want to do this and this is what these people need to know. It needs to be workshopped, it needs to be thought through. And that's what I think that, you know, stepping outside of like this Instagram stories and like self-promotion and like all of this kind of stuff is valuable for artists to do, you know, to really actually integrate with like the community that you're directly going to affect.
But I must say though, I do appreciate Instagram for this reason because it's given us an avenue for artists to take it away from the white cube and take control in a certain, you know, to a certain extent. Like, you know, artists that would not be shown today are able to get this opportunity because you have this online platform where you could promote yourself, you could show your work. And so I appreciate that too, you know, and that's great that, you know, that power, a portion of it is taken away from these institutions that call the shots and decide to shine, you know, a light on a particular artist only.
I mean, I think that, I mean, I'm not discounting the value of Instagram and the ability to sort of self-promote and like put your work out there, but like the measurability, like what I don't like is how it has become measurable and like how this person has these many followers that therefore their work must be more important than somebody who has these many followers. This image has these many likes and therefore the more of that majority has, so like does like this sort of like idea of yes, let's democratize sort of like this way, but like does it make it substantive?
Yeah, it's kind of the history of the world. It's like let's democratize, but then let's commodify it. You know, we democratize it and then we put you know, we add value to it so that it becomes more valuable. If this person has more likes, this person's more valuable than this person. Yeah, I see what you mean.
Let's change the topic because I'm going to start talking about talking about blockchain.
I have a great question.
You know, we're going to be talking about blockchain for the rest of the panel.
Okay, no. I have a great question. Wait, what was it? I just lost my train of thought. So from what I'm taking away from what you said, from what you both said, is that the role of artists is varied, right? There are various roles for artists, but I'm wondering what you both think, individually. Some people say the role of artists is to, change the world, or the role of artists is to bring light to subjects that people don't want to deal with, or bring issues to the forefront that the rest of the world is ignoring. And I'm just wondering what you think as artists. I've always felt when I've heard sentences like that puts a lot of pressure on artists. Some artists just want to make art. And, is that okay? What is the role of an artist today?
Yeah, I've that works for me. No, I've thought a lot about that, actually. In the past, I've gone through it. And so in the past, I just wanted to make work. And I thought the role of an artist, sometimes it could be when you just want to make work and you just want it to be appreciated for what it is, was an interesting perspective. And I thought that was a very naive perspective of me. And then I realized my work will never be viewed the way I want it to be viewed, as just artwork by this person. In the culture and the history that we've had, it's hard to see work without connecting it to art history, like who's been making work for hundreds of years that's been recognized, and what kind of, I've had comments like, why don't you make, like African work, like black work or something. I'm like, but this is African work, this is black work, I am African, I am black, and this is what it is, and this is the avenue I want to take. And so the role of an artist lives between the two, the things that I want to make and the way that, the world sees the work. And if I'm not conscious of both, then it sort of, then I'll be naive. And it defeats the purpose of an artist making something to say something from a perspective of knowledge and history.
What is the role of an artist today?
Thanks. I don't. That's a really hard question to answer, obviously. And I think that artists should. You're always going to have like a different, like a varying degree of like the kind of work you're going to get really bad work, you're going to get really good work, you're going to get like okay work, you can get like work that's like naive, that's really good, you can get all this is like, this is the nature of it. But like sort of pinning a responsibility on a vocation, it's like saying, what is the responsibility of a lawyer today? It's really hard.
We know.
You know what I mean? Like, it's really hard to sort of kind of get a global answer to
Absolutely.
to it. Sorry to
what
target you.
What are your thoughts, though? What do you
what
think?
I think that I should, I'll just tell you what I do as an artist and what I think is important
Absolutely.
for me. I think what's really important for me is to like unfold like a practice and stories, and like to go through an experience that I feel is valuable for people to see, and like to change how we look at mediums, like so that things are not always sort of like that Western canon of like this needs to be on canvas, or this needs to be experienced in this way, this needs to be like accommodated or like commodified in this specific way. Like my practice is all about trying to explore sort of trying to explore a different approach to making, and like a different way of trying to tell stories. But that said, it's a constant like exploration of sort of what's going to happen. Like I don't know what's going to happen like next year. Like what's going to inspire me? Like am I going to be doing video work? Am I going to be doing this? So that's sort of the thing. But like one of the main things that I want to make sure is that these stories that I'm telling are substantive and captivating and interesting. And I can't tell all artists to do that, And I don't think that all artists should have that responsibility. And like after I've been Um, and then you can't ask artists to sort of like, no, I can't ask artists to do that. You know, I can't ask artists to say like, you know, and like for me in my personal practice, like I've been dealing with like very severe issues for like my past 3 or 4 projects, and like my next project is like all centered around like suicide and like architecture, and like that's really heavy. And so I do actually need to also look at my practice, like what can I do to heal myself, like, and like in a very selfish way, like should I be allowed to go and do social practice because it's self-healing for me? And that's very problematic because I love doing it. I love like working with communities a lot, but then is it selfish that I'm doing it just because it makes me feel better? And like does it, but it also helps, you know, like is it a give and take situation? So yeah.
I think that was a really good answer.
We're good.
Thank you for that. That was a really great answer, both of you. Those were really great answers. I think we're just doing a little time check. We can go? Okay. Time check. All right. So, yeah, I think we'll do. I have one more kind of grand question. I'm gonna wrap it up, and then we can take questions from the audience, if that's okay. If you guys have any questions, I hope. So I always wonder what for each for various exhibitions. I always wonder, you know, because some artists get nervous, you know, when their work is being shown. Obviously, you're putting your soul out there to be critiqued by the world. So who wouldn't get nervous? But I always wonder what artists what they hope that the viewer walks away with. Like what are their hopes for whether the show sells, it doesn't sell. What do you hope? Like when people see your work here today at Prizm, what do you hope they leave? What do you hope they take away? I mean, both of your work deals with very important and very deep issues. So I wonder, you know, what you hope that the audience walks away with.
We're good. Okay. For me, my work is so layered that I don't expect the audience to take everything the work is trying to do, but I mean, that's a little bit of a difficult question I haven't encountered before, but I really think if the audience just, you know, like, I really don't mind if somebody just sees the work and, you know, they think it's, you know, formally okay, then that's fine. If they think, if they wanted to get into it a little bit deeper and find out, like, my work deals with, you know, different topics, like, you know, from painting history to mark making to, you know, commoditization of, you know, various cultures that I talk about, that's all right. If my audience was to get, you know, to even see it. So I never really, I don't have hopes for anyone to take anything from it. It's there if you want it.
I think that beauty is a very interesting tool and aesthetics and choice of it, that what people decide is beautiful, what they think is beautiful, and being an artist, knowing how formally things can look beautiful or how things can look ugly. With my work, and when you see my work, like how it's presented, like I want to make sure that there's a sort of sense of levity, this sort of priming for something to come. So like, even like the construction of it and like how it's held and like how it's presented, it's sort of like off of the wall, it's sort of lighter, it's sort of like, you know, the engineering of how it is hung, it gives you, all my work, I really try to make sure that there is this sort of like levity to it, like this sort of like breath that you can take in and look at it, and then when the story hits you, you're prepared because it's really hard to. That's one of the things with photography and discussing like topics as grim as they are through photography. It is a smash into your face. These people are dying, you know, and like you never know how anybody is prepared to see those images. But like if I can, through abstraction and through this type of formalism, can prepare their body to be like in this state of like levity, and then the story to be communicated, and like they learn how the process is made and like how it happens. But then also at the same time, you know, these are artworks that need to exist, and like they need to exist in a space, and that sometimes you just want to enjoy the gritty beauty of it, you know. So there is a sort of like mixed reaction, and like, you know, that's the reality of it. Like we can't survive without phones now, and like this sort of impossibility of solving the problem, the impossibility of like loving and like appreciating beauty from something that is like incredibly grim.
Well, that's a little bit of a grim note, but we're going to take some questions from the audience. And yeah, can you hear me? Okay. Okay.
Thank you. Well, I wanted to thank you all for your really insightful comments. They're obviously difficult questions, and you really gave a lot of thought to it. Tahir, I know I'm coming.
I love you. I knew that. Come for me.
You know,
do it. Yes.
So it's interesting because I've seen your work really transition
Right.
and evolve from more of the, you know, more representational work, and now doing this abstract work. But it wasn't until this panel that I understood actually the messaging that you were conveying. And I think I almost liken it to like drinking wine, because I started off drinking Moscato. You know, it was like sweet, and it was like it went down easy. And then I moved on, and now I drink more like reds. They're like more complex, and you know, there are more notes of da-da-da-da-da. But
Right.
I think that looking at your current work, it is so complex. There is so much going on. And there's this journey that you're talking about, that you're going through, that it's just interesting because I feel like many people won't get that until they hear you. And so I guess I just wondered, how do you navigate like creating work that's not so obviously, you know, palatable, but
Right.
but when you have that deeper understanding, it becomes more relatable. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I battle with this a lot. This is the main problem with my practice. This is like it's a really difficult sort of like point where the story and the understanding of the conceptual side of the work sort of like unfolds, even like looking at it, you know, like when you look at it, you see it in one way. When you understand it, then you see it in another way. When you absorb it, then it really sort of like even unfolds, and like the visual language is sort of like unfolding in front of you as you see it. And like I can't be there for like it'd be amazing. It's like clone myself and be like, hi. No. But it is something that all artists have to battle. I think about Eva Hesse a lot, and like her work, and Mona Khatoum, and Teresa Margolyes. I always say these names. Like I always try to get like, look at these artists. Everyone look at like, and when you see their work, you understand like sort of it's a similar visual language to mine. And you know that there is a story, and it is about sort of like my career as I move forward, and as people start learning like my language, then you know every next iteration of what I make, they're going to start learning my language. They're going to see, oh, this is what it is, and then they'll inherently understand that there's something deeper beyond that. So like this is just the beginning of like a 40-year plan. And branding activity. Did that answer it?
Yeah, that's
Thanks.
great. Yeah.
Any more questions? No? Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you guys so much. Thank you for your time and your attention. We really appreciate it. We know that time is valuable, especially when you're trying to get around to these art fairs, because these streets are not kind. That traffic is terrible. So thank you very much for being here. We appreciate it. Be sure to check out Elena Simone's booth and check out their work. It's really phenomenal. Thank you.